SEB is a bank founded in 1856, and in 2007 we actually did the first green bond that we did actually for the World Bank. And that was the first green bond ever launched in the world. And blue finance is very important for us. It's interesting to be in China, where we've seen the green bond market develop very quickly. China is now the second largest green bond market in the world. As far as water is concerned, we feel that there are three main problems: too little, too much, or too dirty. And there's a lot of money required to solve that. We calculate, together with the United Nations, that in 25 years there's going to be a need of $22.6 trillion to come to terms with all the problems that related to water. So what can a bank such as SEB do in this process? We think that we can do advisory. Of course, it's very important to make this important to our client, to the public, and to the public authorities. We can also act in brokerage. We can transfer assets by providing access to liquidity and to capital. And that, of course, goes very much for the marine industry. We've already heard how important the transformation is and also how costly it is in terms of changing fuel, changing engines, and all the other aspects involved. We can also provide investments, provide asset management products such as funds, which will be focused on sustainable blue projects, and also, of course, lending, which has already been mentioned. So it's all a question of activating private capital and also using existing platforms that we have seen developed for the green financing already. What has been managed, blue bonds, obviously, is an important product where we can arrange for bonds for some of our corporate customers who are investing into sustainable blue solutions. Blue loans, it's a more simple product, maybe for smaller amounts, where we will provide the same capital to finance projects for either financial institutions or corporates investing in sustainable blue products. Of course, sustainability-linked blue bonds, which means that there are targets set by a corporate customer to achieve certain blue targets, and if those are achieved, they can then use the capital markets using blue-linked financing solutions. Of course, blue certificates and blue funds, where we group blue assets for investors, whether they are institutional investors or private investors, and they can invest into funds that focus on blue sustainability. And then, of course, project finance and corporate finance as well, where we go into mergers, acquisitions focused into the blue area. And then, of course, research. And we as a bank dedicate substantial resources into blue finance research as well. And then, of course, we want to be a portfolio home where all blue assets can be distributed, and also work with debt financing, infrastructure financing. We've already heard about the large investments going into ports, going into the vessels, etc., and also provide equity investments into those same projects. So when we talk about too little in terms of water, only 0.5% of all the water available is actually usable as fresh water, and we all depend on that fresh water, so it's very important to take care of it. We know that the infrastructure used for transporting our fresh water in our urban systems, it's very old. Most of the investments were made 70 to 80 years ago. So there are large inefficiencies ranging from 20 to 25% where we lose a lot of fresh water. We can't afford that. And as was mentioned, almost 4.5 billion people lack safe drinking water. So that's another investment area. And we also know that 70% of all the fresh water is used for agriculture, and that has to be made more efficient so we can make the usage and the waste reduced. And then when we talk about too much, 1.8 billion people face significant flood risks in the world. That was already mentioned. That's a huge problem. So we need to work with making sure that the risk of flooding is much less. There are some very capital-intensive projects that are needed, but also you can talk about simple solutions such as mangroves, which will both be a carbon sink as well as a way of preventing flooding. And we can see that 90% of all natural disasters in the world are actually linked to water problems. And we've already saw the flooding in Valencia that was spoken about earlier today. And then too dirty. we also heard about various projects linked to the cleaning up of water, and I will mention some more details about one linked to the Baltic Sea, which is of course important for us being a Swedish bank. And we also see the requirements of ultra-pure water that the pharmaceutical industry needs. So there is really a water crisis, and we can see that one of those three factors, too much, too little, too dirty, it's either all the three or one of them that are affecting huge parts of the world. So as an example of a bond, I can mention the Nordic Baltic Blue Bond that we issued for the Nordic Investment Bank, which goes to both to sewage treatment, it goes to improving shipping conditions, wastewater, as I mentioned, but also clean transport solutions where you can use the waterways in a more efficient way. You can use the lakes and the rivers in the Nordic area. And one example is the connection between one of the largest lakes in Sweden and the Baltic Sea, where new systems of locks and higher floodgates, which makes the use of water efficiency as well as the transportation, which also becomes more sustainable. Other projects we have seen is the Debt for Nature swap that was carried out in the Seychelles, where there's investment in sustainable water treatment, less waste, less pollution, and then there's an element of donation in there, but there's also interesting projects for investors. We've seen others in Belize, in South America, Central America, and furthermore in Barbados, where there was a focus on the mangrove. And the mangrove, as I said previously, is very key in many areas to reduce both flooding and also to act as a carbon sink. So there are numerous projects, and I believe that we in the financial industry can play a vital role channeling capital into these very capital-intensive projects that are needed to safeguard our water, to make sure that we don't have too much, we don't have too little, and we don't have too dirty water to safeguard for ourselves and for our children and grandchildren. Thank you.